Hello, hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi,
I'm
Gitika.
Gitika, and hello. I'm happy and I'm really excited today to get back to the show with another partner and really excited to show you what we have in store. But let me go ahead and first introduce myself. I'm Gitika. I'm a partner solutions architect here at AWS, and I work with a lot of our partners, both consulting and technology, on validations and making sure that they're set up for success. But before we kick things off, Ulrich, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about Howdy Partner? What is it and who should watch?
For sure, Gitika, for sure. My name is Ulrich Bosquet. I am one of the partner solutions architect here with AWS. Howdy Partner, what it is? What Howdy Partner is a developer focused show that puts AWS partners in the spotlight to show you all their product works, all they build on AWS. This is basically what Howdy Partner is. This show is focused for developers by developers, definitely.
Okay, thanks so much, Ulrich. And we have our guests, Joel and Dante, with us. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Joel and Dante, and what exactly are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dante Martinez. Normally I'm at Atlanta, but I'm down in beautiful Cocoa Beach for a couple of weeks, kind of a
Okay.
staycation kind of thing or a workcation. But I'm a senior solution architect at Celgent. I've been there about 3 years and kind of wear two hats, right? So I'm involved on the offering side. I'm designing and developing a lot of the offerings or solutions that we offer for our clients, and then I'm also on the sales side as well. So I'm kind of a pre-sales engineer, often in the front end of the engagements, trying to talk to the clients, see where the challenges are, and then map some of our offerings. Joel.
I'm Joel McGrady. I'm out of the Bay Area right now. Um, I'm a DevOps automation engineer, so I work in client engagements, implementing the solutions that have been designed and sold.
Interesting. Welcome, the two of you. And before we go into the product that you are going to be talking about today, which is Pipeline Factory as well as CFN NAG, why don't you, Ulrich, go ahead and tell us about some of the AWS services, DevOps services, which work in integration with these products?
Yeah. And today, I just want to introduce everyone to a set of developer tools that basically are part of a CI/CD tools that AWS offer. And most of you might have been already familiar with one of our most famous tool called AWS Code Pipeline. But what it is and what does it do? AWS Code Pipeline is a fully managed continuous delivery service that helps you automate your release pipelines for fast and reliable application infrastructure updates. Code pipelines automate the build, test, and deploy phases of your release process every time there is a code change. So every time you make a code change, Code Pipeline can pick it up and make the change for you based on the release model you define. This enables you as a developer to rapidly and reliably deliver features and updates. You can easily integrate AWS Code Pipeline with third-party services such as GitHub, Code Commit, and other tools. And what are the benefits? So you can say, hey, what is the benefit of using Code Pipeline? I already have maybe something in place. Well, the first benefit is rapid delivery. It helps you automate your software release process, allowing you to release new features to your users. It also help you get started pretty fast. You can immediately begin to model your software release process. There are no servers to provision or to set up. It's all managed by AWS. And also it's easy to integrate. It's really can easily be extended to adapt to your specific needs. You can use or pre-built plugins on your own custom plugins in any step of your release process. For example, you can pull up your source code from GitHub, use on-premise Jenkins build server, and one load tests using third-party services, or even pass deployment information to your custom operations. As you can see here on the diagram here, you can have your developers pushing their code by using Cloud DE, or IDE, by example, AWS Cloud 9. And then once they push their code to any by example, like GitHub or AWS Code Commit, you have your artifact, and this code is now can be built by something called AWS Code Build. And you can say, hey, now you say AWS Code Build. What is AWS Code Build? Maybe it's your first time that you hear about AWS Code Build. Yeah, AWS Code Build is also a fully managed continuous integration service that compile your source code, that's going to compile your source code, run tests, and produce software packages that are ready to deploy, ready to go, and you can definitely deploy it. And then for the deployment, now you have what we call AWS Code Deploy that's going to help you with the deployment. And you can even do all that by using AWS Cloud Formation or AWS the Cloud Development Kit, like we call it CDK. And this is the benefits of using a CI/CD pipeline or with AWS Code Pipeline. All those other benefits. And even on that next slide, you can actually see how it works. This is actually a diagram of the developers pushing their code to code commit. And from there, you can have a AWS Cloud Watch event that tell code commits, hey, trigger in action because we have a new commit in the code commit. And then AWS Code Pipeline now build, test with code build, deploy with code deploy, and actually you can trigger all this action, and then from there, from your development account, you can actually push the code, push your new website or whatever application you have running, and your productions account on the other side. And this is the benefits of using code pipeline, using code build, using the whole CI/CD tools that AWS offer you. And with that, Gitika, I kick it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ulrich. That was a great introduction to the services. Nande, why don't you kick us off and talk a little bit more about Pipeline Factory? And I think you have a demo also ready for us to go today.
You on
Dante,
mute.
you're on mute.
Gotta check that mute button.
There's that button.
Very common problem. Yes.
Yep, yep. So I want to take a moment kind of to introduce Stelligent itself, if I would, and then I'll talk a little bit about Pipeline Factory. So Stelligent is kind of a specialized consulting firm, right? So we only work on AWS. In fact, we have almost radical alignment with the AWS services, right? And we are even specialized within that, right? So we tend to focus on building out DevOps automation or DevOps platforms for our clients, right? So our goal is always to help clients and enterprises deliver software fast, but also with high quality and high security built into that. And at the core of that, we believe that the DevOps framework empowers enterprises to do that, right? So we've built our entire business kind of around doing that on the AWS platform, right? So it's all we only work on AWS. We've been focused on CI/CD in particular since 2009. We are an APN Premier Consulting Partner, and I think we're recognized probably as one of the top consulting partners globally that's investing inside of the AWS practice, right? And we've got a couple of competencies in the AWS financial services competency,
Yeah.
and we were one of the first partners to attain the DevOps competency back in 2015.
Very
And
nice.
then just in terms of our offerings, right, we tend to, our philosophy, right, is to have this framework where we're empowering the engineers or the developers, if you will. So we want to give them one-click autonomy. And at the same time, we want to give enterprises the ability to build guardrails in and controls in. So we're empowering the developers, but we're also giving the business itself the power to kind of maintain standards, maintain high quality, things like that through the software delivery cycle. All right, so I'll share my screen here a little bit. Okay. So I want to talk about a little bit about our philosophy inside of DevOps, right? And even inside of DevOps, we tend to specialize on enterprises that need large scale, right? So it's kind of one thing to have a DevOps workflow where you're maintaining maybe a handful of applications, right? And you can kind of still do a lot of things manually. You might have a checklist, things like that, and that will scale, a moderate amount. But if you're getting into larger enterprises where you've got potentially hundreds or even thousands of applications that you need to manage, right? That equates to potentially hundreds of accounts, AWS accounts that you've got to manage, probably thousands of individual pieces of
Mhm.
AWS infrastructure that you've got to configure and manage, potentially hundreds or thousands of pipelines, right? If you're on a microservices model, for example, a
Mhm.
single application may have, a couple of hundred individual pipelines for each of the microservices that underlie that application. So we've developed this series of what we call factories, and the goal there, right, is that we're building a DevOps product, right? So the beautiful, beautiful thing about almost everything in AWS is you can codify it, right? So if I've got a new account,
Mhm.
I can build a CloudFormation template to codify that. If I need an S3 bucket or some EC2 instances, or even a more complex RDS deployment, I can build all of that as a software product, right? It's a CloudFormation template. It could be a CDK
Mhm.
template. It could be a Terraform template, whatever it is. I can build all of that as code, right? And I can treat that code just like I would any other software product that my company's building, right? So, what do we do with code, right? We want to source it. We want to build it or package it. We want to test it, right? So we want to validate things. We want to validate them at the code level. We want to validate them in
Mhm.
the execution environment. All of that. That code can be packaged as a product, and then we can deliver that product to our consumers, whether it's an internal consumer like a development team or an engineering team, or whether it's a
Mhm.
business unit that's consuming a particular product, or whether it's an external client. It doesn't matter, right? It's all a software product, and at the end of the day, uh, we're going to validate that and publish it and make it available for consumption. So the model becomes, right, if I need to have hundreds of accounts, I can take my centralized team in my enterprise, and it could be a dedicated DevOps team. It could be a more ad
Mhm.
hoc team with just your developers or the appropriate business unit people involved, and I can make decisions. What compliance needs do I have for an account? What guardrails do I want to put on usage for services? What guardrails do I want to put around particular AWS services? Right. So, a simple example, right, is I don't want to deploy an S3 bucket unless it's encrypted, right? So I need to start having defining those standards, and then I can codify them and then publish them out for consumption with everybody. So today I'm going to focus on Pipeline Factory, and
Mhm.
as Ulrich mentioned earlier, uh, Code Pipeline, wonderful, wonderful product. We use it a lot. Um, and if you've got just a handful of apps, right, you can hop right in the console. You might go into CloudFormation. You might configure a few pipelines manually. But what happens when you need to build out hundreds of pipelines or thousands of pipelines? We start looking at things like Pipeline Factory to enable you to scale that, so you can deliver them quickly and you can deliver them consistently as well. All right. So Pipeline Factory, right? We're essentially just creating a product from the configuration around Code Pipeline itself, right? So that might be the configuration of the pipeline itself. It may be configuration of some of the underlying services that you're using as part of the delivery
Mhm.
as well, right? So that could be code commit, code build, or code deploy, or any of the third-party equivalent tools to these, right? So if it can be configured through a template, or if it can be configured through an API, it's compatible with the framework. So you can certainly swap out existing tooling or different tooling from the AWS native tools. And the idea is we take that product, we define it in code, we do some validation on it, and we publish it out to AWS Service Catalog. And from there, the developer can pick and choose what they need to deploy, and just one button deploy that to their environments. So what does a pipeline
Okay.
product look like? You kind of saw it on what Ulrich was showing earlier, right? This one's a little simpler, right? So this is a very
Mhm.
simple CI/CD pipeline here, just 4 stages: source, build, test, and deploy. And you can imagine, right? Each of those pieces can be codified, right? So AWS code commit, I can come in and create a CloudFormation template. And I can define the name of the repository, where it exists, who's got access to it, all of the things that you might configure as part of code commit. You can do all of that in CloudFormation or CDK, right?
Mhm.
Same with code build, right? So I'm going to define a project. I'm going to define the build sequence itself typically inside of a YAML file. I'm going to define how that how an application or a piece of code is packaged, all of those things. What's the artifact going to look like from the build, etc. Where am I going to store the artifact? All that can be codified, right? There's no native testing tools in AWS, right? But most of your testing tools now can be codified as well, right? So a couple examples here. We've got Appium and Cucumber, and they do have very different configuration languages, of course. Cucumber a little more natural language, where Appium has kind of the JSON-based configuration. But in either case, right, we can codify the tools, we can codify what tests are run, we can codify how feedback is gathered and sent to the developer as well. And then the deployment itself, right, so we can use AWS Code Deploy. We can configure things like the deployment name, if it's going to ECS, EKS, is it a containerized app? Do I need to do blue-green deployments? All of those things can be codified and put in there, right? So we put all those pieces together, and we can actually package that up as a single pipeline product artifact, if you will. And we can store that artifact itself inside of a repo like code commit. So you can do anything you would do to any of the rest of your code, right? You can version it, you can control changes to it. So if I've got a new test, for example, that I need to incorporate, I can simply update that template to include that new test, and then push that to everybody that's using that current pipeline very quickly. All right. So you've built that pipeline product out, and then just like any other piece of code, we need to do some things to it before we publish it, right? So we're going to pull in that product, that pipeline product itself. We're going to validate it. So this is where our tool, open source tool called CFN-NAG, comes into play, and Joel will talk about this in a lot more detail after me. But the idea there, right, is that we're doing some template validation. And this is static analysis, right? So this is opening the template up and running just a text check for any rules or guardrails that you might want to configure for that template, right? So you can do anything as simple as validate that an S3 bucket is encrypted, right? Or you can have very complex rule sets that are checking out entire environment stacks. So if we validated that stage, right, the next level up there is that we're going to deploy that template out to an operating environment, so typically a temporary testing environment, and we can build additional rules to validate that everything looks okay inside of AWS config. And it might be the same rules, right? So we may have a secondary check on that an S3 bucket is encrypted, or that that a particular EKS deployment is configured a certain way that meets the corporate standard. We can create a rule in config and have that checked in the actual live environment as well. And if all that passes right, then we can then publish it out to service catalog. And from there, the developer, of course, can just go into the catalog, select the package that they want, and then with the one button deployment, they get a deployed pipeline. So they're happy because they got it. They were able to do that on demand. They're able to do it within a few minutes. And then your business is happy, your enterprise is happy, because they've been able to define all the standards around that pipeline. So that's quality standards for the build, the testing, the deployment process, and then also security standards for all those stages as well. All right. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions at that point, right?
So I was wondering if moving to like a microservices model complicates managing the CI/CD pipelines. I know you have a lot of experience in this area. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely, right? Because you're moving, you're shifting the entire software delivery model, right? So when you're in a monolithic type application, you might be used to one or two, at most a handful of pipelines to deliver a single application, right? And there's a whole other segment we could do probably on why monolithic development is bad. But as people start breaking up the application, right, the ideal is that every service, every microservice you have in an application should have its own independent pipeline, right? So that I'm not mixing, crossing domains and delivering each service or each unit of the domain together, right? They should be able to be deployed and delivered and updated independently as well. So you may suddenly find yourself, you break up a typical monolithic application, you may suddenly find yourself with a couple hundred, potentially
Yeah.
even thousands of pipelines to manage. And that just doesn't scale well, right? If somebody's having to manually build those out, manually test them,
Hmm.
manually deploy those pipelines, then that becomes a large amount of overhead.
Yeah, I agree. And how do you think specifically pipeline factory helps in from scaling perspective?
Yeah, so it gives you, I mean, the biggest thing there to me is that it's giving you a consistent workflow, right? So we're going to define the
Hmm.
workflow for how a pipeline is built, how it's validated. We're going to define a workflow for setting the standards, and we're going to define a workflow for how you codify that pipeline and then how it gets deployed.
Right.
And then we're on the consumption side of it, we're going to define a workflow for how that pipeline gets consumed and how it's actually deployed and used by the development teams.
Got it. Thank you so much, Dante, for that. I believe you do have a demo for us.
Yeah, I sure
And
do.
okay, amazing. And for those of you who are just joining, today we are talking about Pipeline Factory and CFN NAG, and we are about to dive deep into Pipeline Factory demo with Dante.
All right.
Okay, here you go.
So I want to start, and I'll demo all of this from the console itself, right? So I want to start in the code pipeline console, and we'll be back here a couple of times, right? But the first pipeline I want to show you, this is the publishing pipeline itself, right? So if you remember, we have that pipeline product, and we treat that just like any
Hmm.
other piece of code. We've built a pipeline to actually manage the development of that product, right? So it's a little meta, right? Because this is a pipeline of pipelines here, right? But we take that, we source that CloudFormation template in the sourcing stage. We pull that out. We go to the first validation stage as we did, and I'll show you some details here. So this is where we're actually loading, right? So you can see we're actually installing CFN NAG, which Joel will walk us through in a little bit as well. And we're going to execute a check here, right? So we're actually looking at a template that built that's going to build the pipeline for us, right? And we've actually run a series of checks and controls on that. A lot of these are just warns, right? So things that are more informational, right? So this apparently has scan on push enabled for an ECR repo. Best practice is to not have that enabled, right? So there's a check for that. There's a warning on that, but everything passed clean on this, so it did go ahead and continue with the pipeline. Go back here. Oops. We then took that template and we further deployed it into a temporary testing environment, and then we were able to execute a series of checks on that via AWS config, and then finally it gets published out to service catalog. So you can imagine, right, if you're a DevOps team, and you're tasked with setting the standards for your CI/CD pipelines, you can define those standards. You can have rules that are checked in this validation stage, and then you can allow your developers to simply deploy directly from service catalog for that. All right, so we've deployed that pipeline product now, right? So in this case, the example is a very simple ECS deployment. It's going to be, we're going to actually have some options for the framework we're using, and I'll show you how that works in a moment. But I'm going to come in here, select this product, launch it, give it a temporary name. And you'll see, because you can parameterize things in service catalog, you can actually have, you might have pipelines that are similar, and the only difference is going to be the actual framework that it deploys, right? So you can give your developer the option to come in here and select the framework, and you can get very specific, right, with this, right? You could have specific versions of the framework, or you could have different options set for the framework. So you can give them, empower them by giving them whatever framework and configuration of those frameworks they need, but then also give them guardrails in that, and that you've already determined best practices for any particular framework, and you can configure those into the pipeline itself. So I'm going to go Nginx today. Just give this.
Dante, I just wanted to ask, is that what is defined as a pipeline product, or is there any other? What really defines a pipeline product?
Yeah, so it's really that it's the package of all the configuration that goes into code pipeline itself, and then any of the stages itself, right? So that might be code commit, code build, code deploy, or any of your external testing tools. So all of that packaged together constitutes the pipeline product, and then you can front end that with service catalog for the consumption model.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So I'm going to get that launching. That does take a while, right? So we're probably 15-20 minutes, which is never good for live. So I took the liberty of deploying one earlier. Let's see here.
Okay. And Dante, just in case someone wants to test it out or work with Pipeline Factory, do they just go into AWS Service Catalog and they'll be able to work with that, or will they have to do anything additional?
Yeah, so they would need to contact us, right? Because the Pipeline Factory itself is a framework, right? So it's not a productized set of code that I can share. But we can deploy it fairly quickly as a proof of concept in most cases, and they can kick the tires around in that method.
Got it.
So here's the deployed web app, and you see it's actually provisioned quite a few objects for us. So you can see it's actually deployed a CloudFormation stack, and that's what actually will do the deployment of the pipeline itself, and then execute the pipeline itself. But for our purposes today, right, the two most important things is it's deployed this pipeline here. So I will open that up. So think about from your developer point of view, they were able to come in within just a minute or two, deploy a fully functional CI/CD pipeline with everything configured as the enterprise wants it in terms of quality around testing, quality around builds, and then all of your security controls built in, right? So this pipeline was deployed within minutes. It's got the full sourcing area, it's got the build area, test area, and a deployment. And it's actually already executed this pipeline and successfully passed all the stages and deployed the application. So the other important thing that it's given us is the actual application has been deployed. So I will open that up, and there you go, right? So nothing too flashy here for the demo, just to show you a functional Nginx engine is running, and it actually did the deployment for us. So if I go look at ECS here as well, you can see it actually deployed the application inside of ECS. So it actually built the cluster for us. It actually did everything as far as configuring the task definitions and how it's going to run, where the image was stored, et cetera, right? And if you looked into each of these stages, right, so you could actually see how did it build that. It's actually building the container image and then shipping it off to ECR, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that's configured as part of the pipeline product. All of that's deployed, within minutes, essentially, from the point of view of the developer.
That's very interesting. I would have never thought deploying a CI/CD pipeline would be that easy and set up within minutes. I think that's a very interesting product that you have.
Yeah, and then you think of, like, in terms of overhead at an enterprise, right? What they're dealing with, you're saving your developer a great deal of time, right? Developers, or at least in my experience, they don't want to deal with having to build a CI/CD pipeline every time and then managing that and then taking care of it, right? So depending on the structure of your enterprise, right, you can have a dedicated DevOps team, whether it's all DevOps engineers or whether it's more of an ad hoc team from your development teams. They can sit there and define the standards for the pipeline and then codify that and then make that available for quick consumption by your developers. So they can deploy fast, so they're happy, and your business units themselves are happy because they've been able to ensure that they're getting consistent standards on all the pipelines, right? So if you've got 100 different microservices, I can ensure that they're all going to be deployed consistently the same manner. Every framework's going to be configured correctly. All the environment that they need is configured correctly. I don't have to worry about any of that anymore.
Right. Very interesting. I think I learned a lot. Like, I would not have imagined a product like that, and I had read a little bit about the pipeline factory, but I think the explanation that you give has been amazing, at least in me understanding what exactly it does. But thank you so much, Dante, for that. Joel, are you ready for the CFN NAG and taking over from here?
Uh,
Definitely. Did you have something, Ulrich?
Yeah, I wanted to add as Dante. Also, does that help organization removing the human interaction too much with their CI/CD pipeline? That way, nobody breaks the CI/CD pipeline. By example, internally, every time I have to push something, Gitika knows that I'm always say, "Hey, I'm gonna break it. Somebody better touch it because if I push, it's not gonna work." So,
Yeah, exactly, right. So I think everybody runs into this problem at a certain point, right? So because they start in AWS and they go, hey, this is great. I can configure everything right here from the console. And then they suddenly realize, well, hey, I need to build 10 pipelines. I don't want to have to go to the console every time. Okay, neat. I can do that through CloudFormation, right? So at least I've got a consistent means of doing that. This is just kind of taking it to the next level, right? It's treating that CloudFormation template as a product and saying, hey, I need to use this enterprise-wide. I need to do this not 10 times, but 100 times, potentially 1,000 times, or an unlimited number of times. And I need to do it consistently, right? I can't have a human forgetting to check the box that says, turn encryption on, right? That needs to be every single time without fail. I need to get that in there, right? So the way you do that is you codify it and you build a pipeline to ensure that checkbox is there, and you automate the workflow as part of that as well, right? All of that leads to consistent quality of the build, consistent quality of how the deployment's done, and ultimately it plays into your security role as well, right?
I think consistency and reliability are a huge call out too for CFN NAG,
Yep.
realistically. Um, not to hijack this into a segue, but here we go.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, yeah.
Let me
Yep.
share my screen here. Yeah. CFN NAG realistically lives in a set of code quality tools that uh, grows out of like the sorts of checks that we all want to be sure that we are doing when we're making the CloudFormation template or using any of our infrastructure as code tools, right? One of the main sorts of disconnects that people have when adopting infrastructure as code is the feeling that they don't have as much oversight over the resources that are generated via the cloud formation as they do the stuff that they generate by hand. And so these linting and quality tools let us have a sense of like a peace of mind around that we're not making any obvious errors and just like overlooking it because of all of the other more complicated things that we're doing. So the repository that we're here, is CFN NAG, and this one is an open source product that is released and is available to anyone. Um, the normal way to use CFN NAG is just to gem install CFN NAG. And this will go out. Yeah, okay. Okay. Pull that in. We have a few other options depending on how we want to encapsulate the product. We can use Brew. There is a serverless application if you'd like to include CFN NAG inside of your current code pipeline. It's in this linked off of the README here. We also have a CFN NAG Docker image. And those are all linked off of that same bucket.
Yeah, and typically if you're using this at any kind of scale, right, you're either going to use that container image, or you might, a lot of times I'll set this up in code build itself, right? So I can do an install script, and then have code build pull it, and then execute the test, right?
Right. And actually, instructions for doing that are here inside of this repository as well.
Yep.
So here we are running in Docker as well. And when we're looking at the examples today, we'll take a look at some that are run via a Docker image, as well as this one that was just installed. But here we'll give a basic basic example of how you would scan a template. And so the template that we'll do here is CFN NAG scan, and we're going to check the input path for demo, and I'm going to include this IAM. So when we have the scan, take a look. It should come back with both a failure and a warning. As Dante touched on real lightly, warnings and failures are treated differently by the scan on the back end. A failure is something that we know is absolutely a problem. An IAM role should not use a wildcard resource with pass role action on its permissions policy. That is always a mistake. The warning is something that is likely a mistake, but you could have some reason to do. So there could be some reason that you would have a wildcard resource on your permissions policy. So when we look at the actual template here, you can see that is detecting those things there.
Yep.
And so if we take a look with the pass role having been fixed, that's this one that's on this screen. You can see that wildcard resource has been removed. And so we no longer have the failure. The return code on the CFN NAG scan, in this case, is a 0, because even though it's a warning, it still ran successfully. The return code with the failure is non-zero, the way that you'd expect. We also have the ability, if we wanted to essentially acknowledge that we have like this role that has this issue with it, we can build a little suppression stanza into the metadata for our template. And this one, basically I'm saying this role, this pass role right now, I'm using it to see what boundaries I need to implement, and I'm going to use it with an access advisor. And so I can actually put that right inside the template to make sure that, you know, people don't hijack this template for things that it wasn't intended for. And I guess I'll pause here and make sure that this this makes sense, or if there are any questions.
Yes, it does. So, how about you give me like a quick intro of CFN NAG just for the people who might be joining in and what exactly you're showing to us?
Right. So CFN NAG is a static code analysis tool use to ensure that cloud formation templates specifically
Mm-hmm.
are meeting some general rules. Generally, we don't want any IAM rules that are too permissive. We want to make sure that our security group rules are what we expect.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that we have our access logs, or that all the logging that we expect will be enabled, and that all of
Mm-hmm.
our encryption is enabled. We also
Right.
want to make sure that passwords don't get displayed in places where we don't
Mm-hmm.
expect them to be.
Correct.
And so, what's actually happening inside of the tool, the uh, CloudFormation template gets parsed in, and
Mm-hmm.
when we, this specific rule here is that, um, this is the custom rule that I was going to show later. I will show you this one that makes a little bit. So this specific rule is to ensure that all S3 buckets have encryption turned on them. And we take a look at our CFN, or we parse in our CFN template, grab all of the resources that are S3 buckets, and
Mm-hmm.
assert that, or just check to see if any of them have no bucket encryption turned on. So it's a pretty
Okay.
simple check.
Right.
There are some more complicated checks. Here's one that looks across Lambda functions to make sure that they have permissions set, appropriate permissions to be able to write to CloudWatch logs. And so we have the actual policies that need to
Mm-hmm.
be, the managed policies that need to be included there, as
Mm-hmm.
well as iterating across the Lambda functions that have been defined, and essentially asserting that they hold permissions, and that those policies in those permissions are these policies.
Got it. So each of these checks take place before any kind of deployment takes place. Like the CI/CD
Yep.
pipeline will
That's
make sure
correct.
that all of
Yep.
these best practices are in place. And I think this is a very easy method overall, just to make sure that consistent best practices are being followed. And within the
Right.
pipeline itself, having them is, I feel, the most convenient way of going about doing that.
Yep.
Putting them in the pipeline is really terrific. Even better is having them in your local development environment, right?
Okay.
One of the core principles to agile development is to fail fast, right? And so
Right.
if I have used the CDK to generate a complex set of nested templates, I want to be able to know if that set of templates has issues, right, before I go
Mm-hmm.
on to my next development task, right? And as a
Right.
matter of fact, CDK, or the CFN mag, is integrated into Visual Studio Code, so that you can actually uh, run it in its own container inside of your IDE. It's
Oh,
uh,
Does that mean anyone can just use go to the GitHub repo and actually just start using CFNAG?
that's correct.
Yep.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what the number is, but there are at least a couple of hundred built-in rules out of the box. So even out of the box, right, like you can have a pretty good set of
It's funny
preventative
that you should
controls.
ask, because we have
There we
an
go.
ability to. So, um, because being able to find the number of the rules is significant to the back end, you actually have not just an enumeration of all the rules and the errors, but the description of them as well. And I think
Joel, can you maybe like expand a little bit so it shows to us?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Let's see if
Or
I
bump the
can.
font up. Yeah.
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 Okay. Appearance. Oh, profile text.
That's good.
Oh, I
Yep.
think that's perfect. Yes.
Great. Wonderful. Okay. So CFN NAG rules between the fails and the warnings right now 169.
Very
Um,
cool. That's a lot of checks.
yeah, and you can see they are as diverse as Alexa ASK skill checks and code pipeline checks, EMR cluster checks. Yeah, they're very, very diverse. But everybody who uses it is going to find situations where um, they are going to have their own checks that they need to implement. One of the things that we don't have a whole lot of checks in CFN NAG right now are across tags on resources. Um,
Okay.
Tags are a pretty central concept to a lot of permission federation ideas, and so
Yes.
I think that they're the sort of thing that people end up writing their own custom tags around pretty commonly. Um, and so, just as like a kind of example for that, I've set this tag. It's a trivial example. Um, let's see. See if I can. Oh, that's not the right one. There we go. Great. Uh, all this is doing is grabbing all of the instances that we've defined in our model, and it's going to grab their tags, and we're just going to see if there's a tag that has the key of name. We're going to make sure
Mhm.
that it doesn't say the word instance. So basically, in this scenario, we've been told that we should not use the word instance in the names for our EC2 instances. And so for this, we're going to say, so for this is an example of using the Docker Stealth CF and NAG image. I'm passing in my templates directory here, mapping it in as a volume into the container. And then I'm also adding in my own little demo rule that I just showed you on the
Mhm.
screen into that container
Mhm.
and asking it to do this scan. And this is the template that we already scanned, so we should get, okay.
Oops.
It's okay. We have had instances like these all the time. This is, I think, there's something which is consistent across a lot of our demos.
Yeah,
They happen to me too.
it's live coding rules, right?
I know.
Okay, here we go. All right. Oh, that's because I need to be. Sorry about that.
No, you're
Here we'll
absolutely
go.
fine.
It happens when you clean your history out.
So I have one question
Sure.
in the
Okay.
meantime. So if okay,
So this
perfect.
one is showing that it does not return an error um, when we don't have the custom rule added. But I'm sorry, we interrupted your question.
No, no, no. You can go ahead explain. I was just actually going to ask. Correct me if I'm wrong. So additional rules can also be made part of the pipeline over here, and incorporated as part of this tool. So you're not really
Right.
restricted to the rules which have been specified, but anything you want to incorporate as part of the pipeline can also be present then.
Right. That's what this is trying to show. If I could spell correctly.
You're fine.
But yeah.
It's like your system knows that you're going live and it
Right.
just
Yeah, it's the bugging.
tries to make sure. Yes, yeah. It's happened to me.
Uh, it does. So I can show you actually, like without the Docker, it might be a little bit easier. So we can just say cfn nag scan dash r demo rule, and then we're going to look at demo tag. And this, yeah, will show. All right, yes, there you go.
There we
So
go. Yes.
we can see the warning 500 here, and it's saying that. So yeah, um, it definitely does work from the Docker way. I just have to figure out
hmm
the volume mappings correctly.
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, so kind of to tie that back in, right? If you think about in the factory model, right, we're building some sort of DevOps product. So pipeline factory, we're building a pipeline product. You could build controls inside of CFN NAG to, for
hmm
example, enforce that code build is configured a certain way, right? If you want to do a build limit how builds are done, or you could have a check that says, a particular testing suite needs to be executed in your testing stage, and you can get very specific with it, as complex as you need it to be.
hmm
Uh, you can even actually call other pieces of code if you need to do further validation inside of it, right? So this, effectively, the way to think of all this is, right, it's a preventative control, right? So I want to ensure
hmm
that the pipeline is configured a certain way and the stages are configured a certain way. I can write a preventative control. The developer can run that in the IDE as well, and then we can run it in the pipeline as well. So you've got those two levels of ensuring consistency.
Right, and this is intended to be like a proactive compliance tool, right? So that like we can know the things that we are putting out are not going to set off any alarms as they go down the rest of the pipeline.
I agree. And I think a lot of us have actually been there where you leave a public S3 bucket and then you're doing kind of testing and then you forget about it, but you want to make sure that all of this is in place. And I think especially when you're doing any kind of testing, even on development accounts, you want to make sure that all of that is taken care of and nothing is like publicly available or causing any
Right.
issues overall in the system. And I think this is amazing.
It's the peace of mind, the like
Yes.
we all talk about smoke checks, but like being able to put smoke checks in at every step in your pipeline, I think is also really nice. I think that that's also
Okay.
like a good segue into talking about some of the other tools that are in the template verification ecosystem. We
Hmm.
like we do a lot of work with CFN NAG because it allows you to do like you can package up those custom rules, like this
Hmm.
example where I called it like this dash R, I could put an entire directory together of custom rules. And as long as you have that directory and you have CFN NAG, you can run
Hmm.
all of my custom rules without any other sort of like uh, jerry rigging or anything else like that. There are some other tools that operate in the like template quality area that are made for like different requirements. Like CFN NAG scan is written in Ruby, which means that
Hmm.
it doesn't like it's not a compiled resource, right? Like there are dependencies inside of it, and dependency management is its own thing. If you decide that you don't want dependency management and you don't really need all of the additional rules that CFN NAG has, like the rules around Alexa, for instance, like if
Hmm.
your specific use case doesn't need that, then there are
Hmm.
tools like CloudFormation Guard, which is written in Rust. And so it's a compiled tool, which means that it's easier to distribute it as like a unit on its own, but it's a little bit more complicated to write expansions to it, for instance.
Got it. So is CloudFormation Guard like one of the components? Like, can you explain a little bit more on that?
Well, so CloudFormation Guard uh, has a different parser for the CloudFormation template. Like when we were looking at the
Okay.
rule definition um,
Hmm.
for what can actually be accomplished inside of CFN NAG, a lot of that goes back to the CFN parser and the CFN model um, code bases.
Hmm.
They're also available at the Stelligent uh, GitHub site, but like the things that are available in CFN parser are going to determine the things that you can do with CFN NAG, whereas the things that the folks that have done CFN guard, their
Hmm.
model. So you can do like a parameter interpolation in CFN NAG.
Hmm.
It's simpler to do it with CFN guard. Um,
Okay.
things, yeah, different tools for different parts of the job, I guess.
Yeah, and what we find at most enterprises, right, is they're actually going to end up running both, at least in the pipeline, right? And it because it gives you
Hmm.
uh, just the ability to execute different types of use cases, fit one tool or the other, right?
Right. So they kind of complement each other and like work in
Yep.
conjunction overall and can be helpful. Okay,
Yep.
that makes sense.
Right.
Okay. Anything else you want to show us, Joel, before we go into the conclusion section today?
I think that that's a pretty decent overlook of the CloudFormation NAG. On the
Hmm.
website, there is also, on the Stelligent website, we have CFN NAG examples.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
if you want to have another like a list of things that you can take a look at on your own, that would be a thing to do. I'll find it here real quick. Oh, for some reason, now my internet wants to go slow. There it is. CFN NAG examples. You can see it at the bottom.
Yeah. And if someone is really looking into scaling their DevOps infrastructure on AWS, this is where they should definitely take a look at, because just by looking at that, that's gonna avoid you a lot of problem, a lot of issues. And like the name says, CFN nags, definitely gonna help you fix some of the problem that you might face, especially when it comes to security issues.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well,
I
and I
think
think that that's a great point. On Dante's slide, CFN NAG appeared in two different pipelines. One of them was the infrastructure pipeline. The other one is the secure environments pipeline, right? The concerns for the two are not separated.
got it.
Yeah.
Any
So
other questions, Ulrich?
Oh, nothing from me for so far. Really glad that
Yeah,
I
Nati,
could
you were going
learn.
saying something.
No, Dante, go ahead.
I was going to say, so right, at the end of the day, right, whether it's a security concern, whether it's a configuration concern, whether it's a quality concern, right, it's all a parameter in code, right? And all we're doing is parsing those parameters and using this as an enforcement mechanism inside of the workflow, right? And that could be a fully automated workflow in a pipeline, or it could be, there could be manual steps involved, or it could just be the developer doing a check in the IDE, right? It's all the same rules, and it's all the same process for checking them.
For sure. Well, I guess then I think we are on the last leg of the episode today, and I hope everyone learned tons from our friends at Mphasis and how they can provide automation, consistency, predictability, and even visibility into your software release. So one last question that I have for you, Dante and Joel, is if there is one takeaway that should be there for the audience today, what would that be? Like, what message would you like to give to the audience?
Automate, 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 and that will solve so many of your issues around scaling, around security,
Yeah.
around quality of the software that you're delivering and operating inside of AWS, right?
Automate, 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 and automate your
Okay.
reliability.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
I think this was a very fun episode for me. Like, I learned a lot as to how CI/CD pipelines and how exactly to secure all of them, making sure consistency, especially with Dante bringing up with microservices, there can be problems and how Pipeline Factory actually solves it. I think that stood out for me. What about you, Ulrich? What do you think stood out for you today?
I mean, definitely, every day when you're interacting with AWS, you think that you know the tools, you think that you know the services. Then not only we keep innovating, but you also find partners uh, that doing way better things than you can imagine. By example, I would never thought that I could do such things with CF and NAG. I could have never thought that, and that just amazes me every day. And like Dante and Joel says, automate, automate, automate. I think I'm gonna keep that one.
Thank you so much, Dante and Joel and Ulrich for joining me. And before we sign off, so we have a tradition on Howdy Partner that you have to sign off with one of the phrases. So we have giddy up, happy trails, and see y'all next time. So which one do you want to go with today? That question is for
Well,
Dante and Joel.
I'm from Atlanta, so I'm going to go with see y'all next time.
Happy trails to you until we meet again.
What about you, Ulrich?
Giddy up, giddy up, giddy up.
Okay, awesome. Happy trails for me, and thank you everyone for joining again. And hopefully, we'll see you soon with another episode of Howdy Partner. Take
See
care.
you soon. Take
Bye.
care, everyone.
Take care.